Hello, hello. Let's see here. Seattle camera. Oh, mic. Hey, Jeff, are you there? There you are.
I'm here. How's it going?
Good. How are you? All
All
right.
right.
Hey, thanks for joining. Hold on one second. Let me just get myself spotlighted. How you doing, Jeff?
I'm well. How are you, man? How
Good.
many teams doesn't do so well on the big screen here? How many people do we have on this webinar?
We have more than 30 signed up, so let's see how many
Okay.
show up and we can get started. So just to make best use of your time. How have you been doing?
Great. It's busy as always, but all for good cause.
Yeah, good. Well, really excited to have you on the Proven Talent Scout webinar. So what we're doing is every week we're highlighting great people from across the country and in the industries, particularly in technology, that are like leaders and thinking about AI, thinking about products, thinking about technology, and really critical in terms of how the industry is changing in terms of how candidates and employers need to be adapting how they're hiring basically. So thanks for joining us. First, let's talk a little bit about yourself. Like you are, I would say, a legend to a certain extent in terms of your
Don't know
career
about that,
path.
but
Yeah, well, I mean, how many people? I think you moved up here with Tellme, right, to Seattle? Is that right? Way back when?
no. I started out as an intern, always a good path, at
Oh, wow.
Microsoft back in the summer of 1993,
Wow.
and that's when I first met many of the folk we have in common. So like James
Yep.
Wirtzman and Will Friedman and all those guys and I were interns together, and then I met Hadi Partovi through them when I came back full time. Jonathan Katzman, all of us were interns together in '93.
Wow. Amazing. Amazing. So then you went from Microsoft, Tellme, back to Microsoft, Skype, was that right?
That's right.
Amazon. Why don't you walk us through sort of your career path as like you kind of made like significant career decisions, why you made those career decisions, how you grew, any thoughts that you can share in terms of
Sure.
as think people think about that.
Sure. Well, again, I think one, I went to I grew up in the suburbs of New York City. I actually like long other story, but my first way back in the before times, did my first little odd jobs doing programming and coding for some local companies at like $5.25 an hour when I was in even middle school and then high school. But then I went to Carnegie Mellon and started my real career as an intern at Microsoft in '93. And I kind of always was, I'll just call it a deeply technical product person. Not, so I've done more than my fair share of coding in the early times, but I was never going to be a software engineer proper. But I loved being a deeply technical person who found and added most of their value in trying to figure out like what jobs need to be done and how do we solve customer problems and what's going to have what now today we might call product market fit and product sense and all of those things. And so I interned as a program, what we would now call a product manager at Microsoft back then, and kind of fell in love with the discipline, fell in love with Seattle, fell in love with, what it meant to the craft of building things that can solve customer problems in interesting ways and that are also a good business. And so then I kind of spent the back half of the '90s at Microsoft, in old school Microsoft, on everything from early versions of Office, like Microsoft Access and things like that, to as the web started to happen, to early high scalable web services. And then, among other things, I started what wound up being a long trail of working on acquisitions from both sides of the table. So the first big acquisition I got an opportunity to be involved in at the time as like a peon, due diligence person and grease skidder, but on Hotmail, which at the
Oh,
time,
wow.
so when Microsoft bought Hotmail back then, it was about $650 million acquisition, which may seem small today, but at the time was actually the biggest acquisition Microsoft had ever made. So it was a huge deal for the company, and got to
Wow.
participate in that at that time as a really, only a couple of years out of college kid. But anyway, so then I decided to follow this colleague named Hadi Partovi, who you know very well as well, who went to co-found a company called Tellme that ironically was just one of these magic places that happened to be a confluence of some pretty amazing people that I was grateful to get a chance to be part of. And Tellme was, among other things, it was really one of the world's first SaaS companies before the word SaaS even existed. And it was, if there's a direct ancestor of today's pre-LLM voice assistants like Alexa and Siri and all those things, Tellme really was that. And so it was a pretty unique and special company. It also, like many startups, went through pivots. It started out trying to be a consumer ad-funded business, which was a terrible business and a terrible thing, but an awesome technology. And then that technology turned out to be a perfect match for what ultimately, was, again, one of the world's first successful SaaS businesses. And then back to acquisitions, then Microsoft acquired that company in 2007, came back to Microsoft for another stint. Among other things, was running MSN Messenger at the time, which at the time was still had 500 million monthly active
Wow.
users, 400 million monthly active users, and was doing like 30 billion chat messages a day, but was starting to get disrupted by mobile messaging, by texting. It was, long before modern OTT apps, but it was clearly getting disrupted by texting, and it was starting to get disrupted by things like Skype. And so worked on us deciding that to buy Skype. So I worked a lot on the Skype acquisition from the Microsoft side. And then we had the opportunity to move to London for a couple of years to help run Skype post-acquisition. Took advantage of that opportunity, again, continued to learn, hopefully do some things right, screwed some things up. And then along the way, from after doing that for a while, Amazon and I had, flirted with ideas for a while, but hadn't been the right thing at the right time. And then they reached out about Kindle. And so this will come ultimately to an Axon connection. But like, I've always cared about things where I can say I'm aligning what I'm building with what my values are, and things that I think are good for the world, in addition to being a great business and great tech. And various things had different aspects of that at different times, but that has always meant a lot to me. And Kindle was like off the charts. It's both one of my favorite products of all time, and I really believe that every minute you can get someone reading a book and not playing, then I would say playing Candy Crush, now I'd say TikTok, but any minute you can get someone reading a book is like, that's God's work, that's good for the universe.
Totally.
And so I was blessed to have the opportunity to help really work on expanding and growing Kindle for 4 years, then came back to my roots in voice assistants and voice technology by going over to Alexa for a little while. And I was happy as a clam there. I loved Amazon. Different people have different experiences at different companies, but I adored Amazon, consider myself an Amazonian from a culture and mechanism standpoint to this day. I'd always known about Axon on the side from Hadi and some others, but had never really considered even thinking about coming here. But long story short, I wound up through a variety of things, including an extremely inspirational talk by one of the fathers of one of the Parkland, Florida shooting victims. His teenage daughter was killed in Parkland, and it was just one of these seminal, life-changing moments that inspired me to read Rick Smith, Axon's founder's book, as it came out, and I was like, crap, universe is telling me something. I have got to go do this. Talked to Rick for a while, and then wound up joining. And so now for the last 6.5 years, I've been the CPO and CTO here at Axon.
Amazing. So tell me a little bit about like, how has your mind changed where you're like, now you're at Axon and you're actually building products around safety where every day, it's like literally life or death with your product. And the body cams have become ubiquitous, and I don't know, like I'd love to just hear like how does that change the bar for what you do and how you think about building products, how you think about building
Yeah.
your team from a mission
Yep.
perspective.
Totally. Again, first, it's an honor and a privilege to get to work on this stuff, and we really pride ourselves on we try to bring the best of the technologies and capabilities that we all take for granted in everyday consumer and enterprise products that are always innovating so quickly, and how do we bring the best of that to a mission and to an audience and to a set of customers that have historically been woefully underserved, and ultimately that doesn't serve our communities. Um, in terms of, I actually think more than because there are lots of products and lots of areas that have very, very high bars for reliability or security or this or that, and of course all of those things apply. I would say the single biggest difference, and the thing that has mattered the most as we're recruiting people, both in engineers and especially in product people, is that in most other consumer or enterprise businesses you might work in, you certainly are never going to be the only user, but in most of them, you or people you know well are a user. And the nature of what you're building affords itself to, what we used to call dog fooding. Like, you can go use the product yourself for what you're doing. Like when I was at Skype, we literally used Skype. That was before the world of Slack or Zoom. We used Skype as Slack and Zoom for running Skype all day, every day. In Messenger, like we used Messenger as Slack, before Slack existed, to run Messenger. Whether you're working on, so the vast majority of consumer and enterprise products you might work on, you kind of have this short code, you have this cheat code shortcut for your intuition as a builder as to what to do by just using it yourself. And you have to be careful in the other direction to not overfit for what you want, but it still is a cheat code for your intuition about making good decisions. And we work in a market segment where almost none of us ever have been or ever will be the user or the buyer ourselves. And so, customer obsession, really, really learning and listening how to get product market fit and how to just build the thing that the customer really needs requires a level of passion and listening and focus and like distilling what they need from what they say in a way that is like a much higher degree of difficulty of that skill than in many other domains you might be in. And you literally don't have a natural opportunity to dog food your stuff. So you have to find other ways to like really, really make sure you're getting it right. And so that is plays a huge role in how we interview and evaluate talent.
Got it. And like, is that both on the engineering side and on the product side? How do you think through that?
Yeah, it is. It's certainly even more so on the product side, but for engineering as well, again, like, and we'll talk about, I know you're going to ask some AI questions later, but like, it's still the case that like, we're, and of course we try to be lean. So like our engineers need to spend time with customers too. And I think when you're trying to see around corners and architect and build something, like you can't, this is why using like, traditional outsourced agencies to do development has never worked super well in software, because you need engineers who understand the customer, understand the product, and really can viscerally know what they're building and why they're building it, or else they'll just make a whole bunch of decisions along the way that turn out to be suboptimal. So the same thing is true for engineers. We need people who are customer obsessed and who can grok this concept of like not just making assumptions that like, oh, this thing smells like chat, so I'm just doing a Twitter clone or whatever, WhatsApp clone, or sort of take your.
Yeah. Got it. And then one question before we just dive into talent is like, how'd you grapple like with the shift from software to hardware plus software? I know like obviously when you went to Amazon, that was a big part of the job, But now like a lot of the job is
Yeah.
hardware, drones and tasers and body cams and supply chains. And like, you came from a very software oriented background to
Yeah.
I'm guessing a much more complex product set.
Yeah, yeah, great question. So I think, well, like all senior leaders who wind up, having some measure of, success at an executive level, we all kind of grow up in our home discipline and with our home thing. And yeah, I think one of the recipes for being a great senior leader is you have to know your lane, right? You have to know what your personal center of gravity is and where you yourself are gonna always be who are the people on your team that like you could do their job better than them when push comes to shove, and like you are the ultimate coach and discipline leader for that area. And then where are the places where you have to be able to hire people who have forgotten more than you'll ever know about that thing and be able to be a good mentor and leader and shepherder of those things without yourself ever being the expert. And so I think I've worked around hardware for a long time, both at Kindle, and then even before that in the Tellme days, we worked on early like integrated mobile experiences and stuff. But Kindle was certainly the first like full on a lot of hardware exposure. But I didn't directly manage hardware engineering, or even hardware product management, and then sort of moved towards that, and then ultimately now have everything end to end from electrical and mechanical and industrial design and all those things, none of which I am myself, right, a practitioner of. But I think what it's all about, finding the people who are themselves experts in those areas that you can trust and bringing to those other disciplines the pieces I can bring about how they lead organizations, about the broader things about quality, about the connection between what and why we're building and like what's the job to be done. So like I can still be very, very useful on the why and the what, even if I'm less useful on the how, but I can also just be a great Socratic questioner, right? Like one thing I think I try to practice, and whenever you're leading disciplines or people outside of your home, is you just have to be really unafraid of asking stupid questions and keep asking, and never say you got it when you don't got it.
Got it. And then, and then I guess one question would be, if you think kind of out into the future, as you've got Claude Code and Codex being so good at building software, do you think there's more differentiation on the hardware side in terms of like physical products that are software enabled? Like, how do
Yeah.
you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, obviously we wrestle, and we have earnings next week, so you could tune in, and I think
Yeah.
I think we think it's a really interesting time. Certainly what I think differentiates Axon is I think we are a great hardware plus software together company. I think we are colloquially a lot of peanut butter and chocolate there, and I think that in an AI world, it's more like what are the sustainable differentiated assets, and like what I think about Axon, and I think other companies can think about what's this for them. I think we sort of are building two foundational durable assets, that together power two core flywheels of experiences and application value. The two of those, one is we're building the world's largest network of public safety sensors and effectors, meaning just devices of one kind or another that can sense things, and then devices of one kind or another that can do things. Think like cameras and tasers and drone, whatever. And that's both first-party hardware that we make ourselves, and being really robust ecosystem that connects and integrates with thousands of varieties of third-party cameras and other things, but connecting them into our network. And so having that largest critical mass public safety network of sensors and effectors. And then the other durable asset is the largest AI-enhanced repository of public safety data. We ingest more video per year than YouTube does. We're,
Wow.
in total, we're like, north This is a bit unfair because it includes some backups and stuff, but in total aggregate raw storage, we're like north of an exabyte, so
Wow.
like it's a lot of data, and yet that's still small compared to everything that's out there. But those two things, and then how do we enrich that data with AI? I think those two things are deeply network affected, durable assets, for us. And then those power sort of two main flywheels of applications. The first is what we've always been known for, which we sort of would colloquially call like capture the courtroom, but is essentially think of it as the after the fact stuff. So after an incident finishes, there's the body camera footage, there's there's all the workflows around sharing and manipulating and processing evidentiary data, reporting, et cetera, to help get to effective public safety and justice system outcomes on the other side of that. And that sort of expands in lots of ways, but it's effectively the asynchronous after the fact stuff. And then there's newer for us, although Taser has always been this, the real time sort of from the moment, and hopefully in some cases even before something starts to go wrong, through when everybody gets home safe from that incident. And so that's everything from having the real-time, crime center and real-time operation center things to the 911 systems to drone as first responder. But if you think both of those flywheels, the real-time and the after the fact, are both made better and differentiated by sitting on top of this network of devices and this repository of AI-enhanced data.
Wow, that's amazing. Amazing. All right, let's shift gears a little bit.
Yeah.
Let's think about how Axon and Jeff evaluate talent. So when you think about sort of engineers and now, the disciplines are collapsing a bit between design, product, engineering. When you think about like the people that are truly exceptional, and you talked a bit about sort of customer empathy, like what do they have in common? How are they different from others? And what are kind of the signals you look for when you're looking at both employees and candidates in terms of great builders and engineers?
Yeah. I think, like you said, we're all seeing, people ask, oh my God, I think, people are worrying about like their identity as a this or a that, and it's true. The shortcut, like things are getting more muddy, but that's okay. Like I think the essential, and you sort of already were saying it, I think what we're seeing, and it's not unique to us, is that the most essential skills of this, I'll call it product sense, and what I just mean by that, in the Google term, but I mean it in this context of what are interesting problems to solve, like why are those interesting problems to solve, and then what has to be true about any solution for that problem. You could call it requirements, you can call it functional, non-functional, but like at the end of the day, what in detail and in the specifics, not at the high level 30,000 foot level, but like both the 30,000 foot write a lot on like what's a good problem, but then the pretty nitty gritty, like no, like a great, right? It's the difference between an iPhone and the pre-smartphone or proto-smartphones of the day before the iPhone.
Mm-hmm.
What are the essence things, from the rounded bezels to making the choices about how a touchscreen based experience would work, to what things need instant latency versus what things can, all of that stuff that goes into the craft of making something meet the needs. That is really the skill that is in common between great product and great engineering people, because the more you're working with agentic coding or whatever it is, that's the thing that you need to be great at to give great direction to those systems to be able to produce, a viable output. And the more you're able to do that up front, the more conviction. And so it's this like the combination of like vision and then critical thinking, and then being able to decompose problems into very well specified, coherent articulations of like what the it is.
And how do you screen for that in a 30 or 45-minute interview? Are you a big fan of the Microsoft deep dive where you drill on one little thing, and or do you have other, how do you think through like the best way to get signal on whether somebody
Yeah.
has vision and can be detail oriented?
Yeah, I would say it is a forever work in progress. I think I would say historically, generally speaking, our interview process mechanism is, it's peculiar in its own way, but it is like, has the most in common with Amazon's style as to anything else. And what I mean by it is a couple things. Like one, we decompose the loop, and individuals have very specifically assigned competent both values, meaning in our leadership principles like aim far or expect candor or like whatever it is, as well as a functional area. And so we try to make efficient use and get good coverage of a candidate across those interviews. Number two, we do blind voting and debriefs. Number three, we have what Amazon would call a bar raiser. We call it an ACE. But then in the content of the interviews, three things that are, one which we've had for since I've been here, and two that are new. One that's sort of not an Amazon thing, but that some other companies like Uber and others, and I think now a bunch do, is always for anything other than like a college entry role, we have a homework assignment. And and I think that's because in general, historical interviewing tends to always be backward looking, right? So it's asking you to show your body of work that you've already had. And I think we found that also having a homework assignment where you have to do a greenfield problem in our space of one kind or another that's appropriate to the job, you just learn a lot about that. And it's shocking sometimes. There are candidates who do great on one and terrible at the other, or vice versa. Yeah. And then most recently with the AI changes in the world, we've started requiring hands-on. We started replacing the traditional coding interview with a eyes-on live using agentic tools to like go do AI-powered coding in real time. And then on the product sense thing, right now we do it for product managers, but to your question, this might start to blend into other disciplines. But we do what we call a product sense interview, but it's really trying to just get at how they think about a fresh problem on the fly in real time, and what questions they ask, and just get at how do they think about decomposing. It's sort of the modern version of the classic design a zero-G coffee maker, Microsoft interview back in the day.
Yep. So I guess so the homework, obviously that's near and dear to the Provn business model. So I guess one of the questions, so we love to hear that. One of the questions is like, is it about the homework, or is it about in a case study, like thinking out loud and watching how they work, or the process, or how do you think about, either like a homework assignment? Why give the homework assignment?
Yeah, I think I think we kind of tend to get three things out of it. One is simply how invested are they in thinking about our domain, and so there's a big difference between people, like we've had people who are like, oh, I went and found 3 cops and I went and did a ride along, and I
wow,
we've had,
that's amazing.
I went and sat in a 911 call center unprompted, and then we have people who, who clearly haven't thought very much about Axon specifically, and everything in between. So they're just seeing how especially since our domain is it's a domain that you need context on to be able to do, and so how much hustle do they have for learning about our stuff? Number two, it is a sense of, okay, in a relatively constrained period, do they seem to be do they kind of have the right a lot, right? Do they have good intuition And can they articulate, hey, I got these facts, I made these assumptions may or may not be right, but if these assumptions turn out to be right, then I'm pretty sure this would be the right thing to do. And just sort of seeing them follow that chain, and do they do a good job of that? And then number three, and at least as important as the other two, is in a live conversation that tends to be a group interview rather than a single person, is how do they obviously, in our world, it's a team sport. And a huge part of being successful in any team, and certainly in a product development culture, is rapid fire. How does someone react to rapid fire questioning? How do you riff and jam in real time on a topic? And like, does that feel organic, or does that feel, like I will get to that on slide 7. Please hold your, that kind of thing.
Got it. And so like, and through this process, both of like either, hands-on, either like doing a homework excitement project or eyes on coding assessment, do you think you're finding candidates who just wouldn't get through the traditional screen because it's more like, the background may not matter as much as kind of what they're actually capable of?
I think it's great. I think that's one of the things that's awesome about what you guys are doing. I would probably say right now, like just like anything with diversity, or what it's like top of funnel. That's a top of funnel problem every bit as much as it is a middle or bottom. So I'd say, I in candor, I'd probably say I don't know, because we probably don't get as many candidates today making it into the top of the funnel that are non-traditional, because we suffer from the same things that everybody suffers from there. I would like to believe that if someone gets in and they can evidence those skills, that they would do really well, and we would be likely to hire them. But I probably can't. It's probably a fair criticism that we're not good enough at that yet.
I guess then if you looked at sort of your team and the stars and people that have done exceptionally well at Axon or even on the homework assignments, and then you look backwards, are there certain things that could predict success either from a resume, or they're like characteristics you're really looking for, and as we move towards AI, that you think are getting to be more and more important?
I'd say going all the way back to like, what are predictors in the like, what could you know a priori from the profile before you engage with them? That's an awesome question, and I don't know. It's a fantastic question. In terms of like, what are the things we see in the process? I would say, I think people, I would say it's that people, maybe it's that last skill I talked about. I think people who are very natural and organic and just sort of feel like part of the team from the moment you're having an interactive discussion with them, and you like ask a question and critique one of the things, and their just inherent way of being is they both have the confidence and they have the rigor in how they think about stuff, but the humility to have no problems with saying they don't know what they don't know, and are therefore able to, just have high get it factor and high throughput dynamic conversations. I think that is because at the end of the day, like, we're people who are great collaborative problem solvers are ultimately, that's probably the single most important critical skill.
That's interesting you say that, because there was I think it was a New York Times, a daily piece, maybe over the last 2 weeks, that was saying that as we move into this world of AI and agentic coding, the communication skills are actually increasing in terms of not only like now you're communicating with AI and you have to be super specific, but you also have to be able to converse, interactively with AI in terms of both being high level, detail oriented, and be able to iterate quickly with
That's
AI.
right. I mean, and it is hard. Like again, just to come back, and on an engineering side, right? It's like what isn't, at least for now, what's becoming even more important, and than ever, and is I don't think going away, is that architectural sense, right? And kind of like again, knowing what all the guardrails are. Again, you can think of the agents as like an army of sophomore interns, right? So
Right.
like
Yep.
they can
If
produce an
that.
awful lot of stuff,
Yep.
and again, or even weirder, it's almost like an army of PhDs who've never worked in industry, right? Because again, it's like
Right.
they have like phenomenal cosmic power, but they are, their foibles are greatly exacerbated by the directions, and their ability to be supremely confident both when they're right and they're wrong is like their strength and their weakness. And so being able to shepherd and guide those requires the human orchestrator to provide those guardrails in that context. And on that decomposing thing, again, think about it is like it is very easy, not easy, it's like very easy, but relatively speaking, to say, hey, I really think that like, we need a better, that people would be really great if we had a better bread box, right? Or it'd be really great if like, we had an app that like does blah, or if we had a doohickey that does blah. And it's actually, right, quite hard to get to, okay, well, what exactly does that mean, and how exactly would that need to work to forget about how you make it work, but the what, right, is and the why behind the what is very subtle, and not that many people can do that well.
Yep.
And that is the most essential skill, I think, as we go forward.
Now, tell us a little bit about sort of Axon's AI journey. How are you thinking about the workforce, and how are you thinking about AI in screening candidates or in terms of hiring new talent?
Yeah. So again, we've tried really. I think we pride ourselves, so we're still founder led after almost 35,
Yep.
more than 30 years now, and
Wow.
Rick himself is the most. I think he's a TP 9999 in the industry of like his own personal journey on AI, and then pushing us to be at the tip of the spear. And while of course I'm sure there are other companies larger and smaller that are ahead of us on one way or another, I feel pretty good about how we've tried to balance both on building AI into everything we build, and then building everything we build with AI. And we're learning and growing as we go, because it's changing so fast.
Yep.
So I'd say on the products, I'll really quickly on the product side of like what's in our products, I'd say and I did a podcast on this a couple month ago or so. We like to try hard to focus on, I'll sort of use the word actually, meaning there's a lot of AI pixie dust, AI for AI's sake, or this or that or the other, or agent, built randomly thrown. Like every time I open Adobe Acrobat now to read a stupid PDF, I can't even dismiss. No offense to Adobe, but it's like it's
Right.
absurd, right? Or Copilot things, or this or that or the other,
Yep.
where it's just shoving it in your face without a clear why, indiscriminately. Whereas like we've tried to, again, because our products are people's job, right? They're a necessary tool for their job. We've built things like this product Draft One that is specifically about using the transcripts of the video from body camera videos to help very quickly make an 80% done first draft of the report they need to write. And most police officers waste, like nurses, 30-40% of their day doing paperwork. And it turns out the information in that transcript most of the time has the information necessary to do a very good first draft that saves them a ton of time. And take like translation, like, you doing like LLMs are awesome at real-time translation, but we took a very specific surgical thing that says we've already got body cameras with microphones and speakers, hands-free, eyes-free on people, on officers' chests. Very, very common for them to have to interact with humans that don't natively speak the same language as them. By default, today, they have to pantomime, or they have to struggle, or they have to wait for a translator to be available. And we built in a very simple, functional way, built into the body camera, a turn-taking real-time translator where the bot acts
that's awesome,
as if it was a human translator in the middle of the two other people. And so,
wow,
a bunch of other things, but we're just very focused on, again, what's a specific problem that we can actually solve with the stuff. And then on the how we build side, I'd say we've done our best to move fast at adopting, first basic use of things like cursor all the way to full agentic, coding. And we're still very much in the middle of it. I'd say, like a lot of companies, we have like a small portion of the population that have already become Jedis and are 100Xers on themselves. And then we have a non-trivial percentage of the team that are ostriching and desperately hoping it's all a fad. And then we have like the big middle that are really working hard at trying to learn, but like the difference, in some ways you go slower before you go faster until like it clicks. And so what we've been doing is we're trying to like pair up and, as we mint new Jedis, try to percolate the Jedis across various parts of the team.
Great.
We've, as I said, started mandating this for new hires. We've also, to be honest, started barbelling our new hiring, meaning, at least for now, we're not exclusively, but for the most part, we're like erring more on the side of hiring more campus and like really, really fresh, young folk, and then more very seasoned folk who have proven that they're on the AI native bandwagon. And we're doing less hiring in the middle right now because we've got a bunch of people who are like mid-career, and we want to get those people through the conversion. Whereas like the young guns coming out of school are more likely to be AI natives out of the gate. And then where we can get staff like we have, for example, like a couple of our staff DE kind of people that we already have that have become full-on Jedis of this stuff. They're so transformatively impactful. So we kind of want more of those and like more of these. And while we upgrade in place, our sort of core middle of the path.
So I guess like as you look at new talent hiring, are there certain skills you're thinking less about given the transition to AI, and other skills you're thinking more about, or characteristics that you think are important?
I mean, I think we've covered some of that, a bunch of it already, but I think less of is, like we certainly care less about specific language, right? Do you have Go? Do you have Scala? Like whatever it is, or you have Rust, in the same way that, in the old days, right? Compilers made it so that no one had to care about machine code. We could all, write at higher level languages. This is like, it's the new compiler, right? So less about that, less, I think also less about, maybe domain knowledge in particular areas. So like, even if you take stuff like video streaming or, certain database things or like, whatever, again, this is not exclusive because like, let's take device firmware, right? Like you're still not going to take your typical full stack cloud developer and suddenly have them working on firmware overnight just with AI. But I would say though some of those things start to matter a lot less. But like we were saying, someone who has really taken the time to learn the tool set of agentic coding and has this like in some ways, ironically, it's forcing individual engineers to have more manager skill capabilities earlier in their career because you're managing agents and all the things that go along with how do you communicate and divide up work and make sure that the person you're trying to get to do work is doing the work you need them to do, right?
Yeah.
Even if that's an agent, that's kind of like a managerial skill set that I think is becoming much more important much earlier in career than it was before.
Great. And last question on career. If you were starting your career today, not in, 1993 or 1995, what would you do first in this? If you were coming out of college, agentic world, what would you be doing differently?
Two things. One, I would just be building stuff. Again, there's just no substitute for just doing things. Like that's probably that. I'd probably just say that. Like one like on the actual skill set side is just build shit and do stuff. And then on the preparing for interviews, I think it's the same. It's not changed by the AI stuff, but I think it's a thing I didn't know back then. But I'd say this idea of it makes such a difference when you prepare for interviews where you do this up front, take what you think, and because I think like an Amazon person, you think of like Amazon leadership principles or various things like that, and you kind of try to think about what are classes of questions that you might get across a battery of interviewers, and then a priori go through what's your hit list of all the shit you're proud of that you've done, and like pre-matrix all your good stories against all of those areas you might get questions, so you have good coverage, so that you're not, as much as you can, you're not thinking on the fly, what example am I going to use for which question, and not repeat myself and not miss anything.
Yeah, awesome. All right, we'll shift to the rapid fire section, and then we'll go into questions. All right, so what's one question you wish every hiring manager at Axon asks but doesn't?
Tell me the name of 2 or 3 people that you're the most proud of the impact you've had on their career over time.
All right, awesome. One question that interviewers ask that sounds smart, but really tells you nothing about whether somebody's going to be good for the job.
Tell me about your biggest failure.
Okay, great. Somebody has 2 offers. One is with a big tech company with a weak mission, or a smaller company with a real mission, and they're trying to decide what to do. What would you tell them?
One, mission is very personal and conic. So if mission in general and the specific mission matters a lot to you personally, of course, go with that. If that's less it would just be know what your calculus is and follow your calculus, right? And try to be as objective as you can about what you think matters the most to you based on where you are right now.
Awesome. In 5 years, the engineer who is most valuable is the one who can blank.
I think what we talked about all during this call, the one who has both write a lot on what problems to solve and excellent collaborative problem solving skills to decompose that problem into the essence of what the solution needs to be, not exactly how to build it.
Okay, awesome. The one thing you believed 10 years ago about hiring that you've completely changed your mind on?
I'd say this homework thing. I'd say 10 years ago, I would have been like, that just feels like a lot of overhead and, extra time and blah, not interesting. And I've completely become a convert on the homework thing.
And then last question, what's the one thing you're most passionate about in your current job that you haven't had in your previous 20-year career, 20 or 30?
I think this sense of purpose and of really, it's the same theme, but it's 100x of really believing, like I say, if the crypto guys hadn't ruined the phrase altruistic capitalism, that is what we are. And so I believe that we are, doing well by doing good, and that is very I'm very proud of that.
Awesome. Awesome. All right. So we have a couple minutes left, maybe 5 minutes left for Q&A. So if anybody wants to type in the chat, there is also a Q&A button at the top.
Cool.
That
and I'll just say I'm on a conference room screen, so I probably won't see
yep.
the chat. So if you could,
that's okay. We'll watch it. So if anybody wants to either put it in the chat or in the Q&A, if you have a question, please let us know. So you have kids, Jeff, right?
I do.
What's your advice to them about this whole AI disruption world they're kind of graduating into? How do you sort of couch that to them?
Well, we have a sophomore in college studying musical theater, and so they're just doing that track, and not as directly relevant, but certainly relevant in likeness and all the things that so it has impact, but it's not quite in the same way. Then we have a high school senior who is graduating and about to start college next year for mechanical engineering. And then we have a sophomore in high school who's we'll see, but is interested in game design and things like that. Okay. And I'd say the same advice as all the stuff we've been talking about here. I'd say it's like, so with our middle son, the one who's about to start college, it is school on average focuses mostly on individual sport work. And there's some group projects, but everyone, kind of tends to shut, like, it's just anything and everything you can do, both in school and in internships and in volunteering, anything you can do to work on real world problems that require collaborative team problem solving is gold.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Sorry, we have 3 questions. So Philippe asked, what has been the most recent AI progress that impacted your team, and how do you think about team management in a world of AI? So like with Codex and Claude Code coming out and the improvements, how do you think that's impacted your team, and then how do you think about the management?
Yeah, so I think that obviously the models are evolving continually, but I think around, plus or minus Claude 4.6 or whatever a couple of months ago really was a sea change in true agentic coding. And we've had at least 2 projects, material projects so far that, as I was like, that one of our staff plus, engineers who kind of went native very early had massive compression on, and we were able to do things just radically faster, and in particular with engineers that didn't previously have. So as an example, one of our products is called Fusus, and it's sort of a think of the many screens on a wall, video management system, aggregating camera feeds from lots of sources. And we're now bringing that a lot into the enterprise world, like enterprise global security centers for big companies, not just law enforcement. And there's a physical appliance that gets installed on the local network of companies or places where the cameras are to kind of normalize the traffic and the configuration of the thousands of different variants of cameras that are out there. But long story short, we pretty much had to rewrite from scratch the firmware and application software on that appliance to make it hit a set of enterprise compliance and IT requirements things that we just hadn't encountered before in municipal networks and things like that. We had to rewrite a bunch of things, including the remote device management layer and stuff like that. And we took a team that themselves had no sort of IoT device management experience or any of those things. And with one sort of good staff engineer and a handful of regular full stack engineers, they did in a couple months what a crack team of experts in that area would have normally taken a year, 8 or 9 months to do. And that set of people probably would have taken much longer than that because they didn't previously have any experience. In terms of the management, I'd say, you know, like I said, like we've created the way we're handling the kind of carrot and stick is we said for this year, we did all of our normal roadmap planning and estimation the way we normally would. And we have a pretty Amazonian kind of high bar for people. You know, we, of course, things change and we swap and adapt as we go, but we start the year with a pretty precise, you know, roadmap and basically to hold ourselves accountable to our capacity. And then we said across the board for the whole team, there's a minimum 10% compression in aggregate across everything. And we basically like said, everybody has to get 110% effectively of where their cut line was with the same resources. And then we put, that's the stick. And then the carrot is we said for every major part of the team that hits that 10% minimum, any squad that gets any individual item done in 15% or more, up to like, you know, 99%, we're actually gonna create a stock pool, and we're basically gonna give back as an award half of the savings they drive. So if you're like a team of 4 people,
that's incredible,
and you deliver twice as much as you otherwise would have delivered, those individuals on the team can get a pretty hefty stock award at the end of this year as a direct result of the compression that they've driven. And so again, who knows? We'll see how it all. So far, thus far in the year, we're kind of tracking towards about 25% compression, which is pretty darn good. It's not phenomenal. It's not 5x, but it's not bad.
But still, that's and you have a big team, right?
People, yeah.
We have a bunch of do you have time or do you have to go, Jeff? It's at 1 o'clock right now.
Yeah, I do have to go. But I can take one more really quick. I've got an in-person
last question. Last question from Vladimir. Sounds like we have a lot of Amazonians on the call. And so Vladimir is asking, if you mentioned thinking like an Amazonian, if you had to narrow it down, which of the 2 or 3 leadership principles do you think matters most for someone to truly excel in their career?
Write a lot and customer obsession.
Awesome. Jeff, thank you so much. This was an awesome Talent Scout webinar, an awesome interview, incredible insights for everybody on the call and on social media. So thank you for all your time, and we look forward to working with you.
Of course. Yeah. Thanks, Nikesh. This was great. Thanks, everyone, for listening in, and awesome questions. I really, really appreciate it. And of course, for everyone, we are hiring. So bring it on.
Awesome. Thank you.
All right. Take care.
Bye-bye. Bye, everyone. Thanks, Jeff.